Okay, greetings to everyone. Thank you to the JLE for hosting this and streaming this class, Pesach class, leading up to Pesach in this very difficult time. Let me ask you please to give me a quick chat greeting so that I know you are hearing me. Mish, nice to see you. Eitan, Elias, Yaakov, Dr. Lewin for Shlomo. Yes, Mitz Hashem. Barry, nice to have you. Mark, nice to see you. Shauna, Shosh, Danny, nice to see you, Danny. Danny K, Daniel, Naomi, Yaakov N, Ruth, nice to see you. Regards to your brother. Eli Natan, nice to have you. Zev, Michael, Ben. Okay. So, greetings to everyone. Thank you for joining. Thanks to Gemma, who's making this happen. And thanks to all you very VIPs, very interested persons. Let's talk a little bit about Pesach. Pick out a theme. Let us pick out a theme in Pesach and try to explore it together. See how far we get with that. Please feel free to ask a question in the chat box. I'll try to keep an eye on that and see if I can remember to notice that. And if not, you're always welcome to email, of course, and I'm happy to answer any questions if I can. Let's begin. First of all, of course, we're in this very difficult time of COVID. Still many unknowns about the epidemic. I wouldn't like to spend this whole session talking about the technicalities. I've made an effort to stay up to date with the science. There is a lot of research taking place. Unfortunately, still a lot of unknowns. In my mind, one of the biggest questions we have is whether durable immunity will result from infection. Many of us have had symptoms, and if only we knew that people who've had the symptoms or been diagnosed positively are, at least in the short term, immune, we could send those people out to be volunteering and helping others. Unfortunately, that's not quite clear yet. The experts are indeed betting that anyone who has had the disease or the symptoms or indeed the infection, with or without symptoms, will be immune, at least for this season. Whether the virus mutates may change things in the future, but it would be an extremely unusual viral infection if you could get it twice. There are some that you can, measles for example. There is a small possibility of getting it twice, but if you do, the second time is much more mild, much less dangerous, much less likely to be dangerous. And so here we are not 100% sure, being that this is a new virus, or at least a new strain of virus. I did make a bracha before, so don't suspect me, please. This is an unknown. So that's one of the most important questions we can get into the armamentarium of facts here. As soon as we can establish that somebody who has been infected will not be infected again, we can send those people out. And of course we have vast numbers of recovered people. The worse the epidemic gets and the more people get it, unfortunately the more people that die, the more people we have who are recovered. And as soon as we know that those people are relatively safe, we can send them out to man the hospitals and the essential services and to help others who need it. It'll be a tremendous resource which will keep society going and can restart the economy and so many other things that we could be using people like that. I've been recommending that when people do need to go out, essential shopping or essential favors for vulnerable people, it should be those who've had the symptoms and gotten over them, should be the ones taking the very small risk of going out and exposing themselves because we think that they will be immune. I asked a professor of virology today whether we have enough evidence yet that people are immune, and he said we can't actually be sure. We can't actually be sure. Again, the experts are betting on it. We have a very few recorded cases of people who apparently were infected, recovered, and got infected again. But the experts are betting that those are false tests and simply tests that appeared to be negative, when in fact probably the people had remained positive. So this is not clear. That's probably, I would say, one of the major questions facing us, because as soon as that happens, we can lift the lockdown, at least in terms of people who have recovered. And if it's a very bad epidemic, of course, that means lots of people who are recovered. So that would be extremely good news. But of course, this little fiendish virus so far outpacing us, outsmarting us, and has not yielded his deep, dark secrets adequately yet. And so we are being brought to our knees by a very, very small creature. And there are many other questions as well that are only now being researched and looked at. There's a certain methodical pace at which science has to go in order to try to answer the unknowns about the epidemic. However, Mitzvah Hashem will get through this. I'm sure you all saw the Queen speaking about it. And the good old British stoic stiff upper lip, keep calm and carry on, is what we need to do. I'm seeing some interesting questions. Jenny and Alan, nice to have you with us again. Any validity to available IgG and IgM tests? Not yet. Not yet. There is evidence that IgG and IgM, these are the antibodies, are formed. We don't yet know how protective they will be. That's problem number one. And number two, we don't have a readily available test yet. Jenny, I don't know what is with Boris, the PM. I'm sorry, I'm not up to date with that, but I don't know. So that is our situation with regard to COVID, progression of the epidemic, and we need to clearly stay locked down. That is the safety mechanism we need at this point in time. Lots of questions are coming through. Can I go to my family for the Seder? And you are best off in total isolation, not receiving any deliveries besides the merest absolutely essential ones. Wipe down and sterilize whatever you can. And Mitzvah Hashem will get through this, and then we'll have to rebuild, hopefully, as better spiritual people. Let's put our minds into a little different space here, something I hope you'll find therapeutic. Prepare ourselves for Pesach in a way that I hope you'll find enlightening. Let me read you some words. What I'd like to talk about, with your permission, is the miraculous aspect of the Pesach story. Miracles, right? I know most of you are feeling we could use a miracle right now. Let's put our minds into the concept of miracles. And although we don't experience revealed miracles in our day and age, that is part of the plan, that is part of the dark phase of history that we need to be moving through. It has tremendous advantages as well, even though that sounds a little strange. And for a documentation of the phenomenon of why we need to live in a dark generation, please take a look at my book, which is entitled As Dawn Ends the Night. That is the book I wrote recently about why miracles will once manifest and they're no longer manifest now. But let us try to bring miracles alive as much as we can by studying them correctly. Let me read you a statement in the Rambam which I've found one of the most astounding things that in all his writings, this is one that I personally find astounding in a very, very fundamental way. I'm reading you now from the Rambam. That's a Mishnah Torah. Okay, Hilchas Chumas Matzah. This is Manim. I'm reading the beginning of the 7th chapter. Okay, here it is. 7th chapter of Hilchas Chumas Matzah. If you'd like to look it up, for those who want it in English, that is the book dealing with Zmanim, which is times, the Shabbos and Yom Tov, the phases of time. And in the section that is known as the laws of Chametz and Matzah, Pesach, which is the Rambam entitles Chametz and Matzah, he begins the 7th chapter in the following fashion. Now the subject of this chapter is telling the story. Telling the story, that is our central mitzvah. I'm sure you know that the whole Pesach Seder is really a telling of the story. I'm sure you're also aware that the mitzvahs of the night, like matzah and the wine, I'm sure you know the maror, I'm sure you know those are real adjuncts to the story. It's important to know this. The real mitzvah of the night is Haggadah. V'gadat labincha, you shall tell your child. That means your external child and your inner child. Okay, the part of you that stands to be educated. If you're alone, this Pesach, as many people will be, the halacha is you tell yourself, even if you know the story already, and if you're the only one present, you read it to yourself. You teach your child, your inner child. And that is the mitzvah. The matzah and the wine and the maror, it's like a show and tell. It's a show in order to tell. So the real current of energy is telling the story. That's what we're involved in. We tell the story by question and answer, by illustrating it, by going through the experiential level of the matzah. That is what we do. And let me read you what the Rambam says about telling the story. Stay tuned. Hold on to your chair for this, because it's astounding. Listen to what he says. Mitzvah's essay shel Torah. It is a positive mitzvah of the Torah, lesaper, to tell. Now, let me invite you, don't look at the text if you have it in front of you. Let me invite you to predict the next words. And before I tell you what the next words are, let me give you the proof text from where the Rambam's coming. He says it's a positive mitzvah in the Torah. Obviously, the Rambam will tell you what the mitzvah is, and then he'll give you the source in the Torah which tells you what the mitzvah is. Let me read you the mitzvah. Shenemar, because it says, Zachar es hayom hazeh asher yitzasem miMitzrayim. Remember this day on which you went out of Egypt. Right? Remember this day. Zachar es hayom hazeh. Remember this day on which you went out of Egypt. Remember means remember it verbally, not just consider it. Remember means to mention it verbally. The Rambam says, Zachar es yom Shabbos, like it says, remember the day of Shabbos. And the way you remember the day of Shabbos by making Kiddush, and you do that over a cup of wine, and you express it. So this version of remembering Pesach, says the Torah, is Zachar es hayom hazeh. Remember this day that you went out of Egypt. Okay, now, how would you phrase that how would you paraphrase that as a mitzvah? The Torah says, remember the day you went out of Egypt. The name we give the mitzvah is Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim, telling the exodus from Egypt. Now, with that background, how would you complete the sentence? I'll begin it, you end it. Mitzvah's essay shel Torah, it is a positive mitzvah of the Torah, lesaper, to tell. What should the next words be? Please type in the next words to make sure we're on the right wavelength. To tell. It's a mitzvah of the Torah to tell. No? Over the story of the going out of Egypt, Barry. The Exodus, Michael. Alex. Jeff. The Exodus. Yes, indeed. Obviously, those are the words. Sorry, I see a request here about the words imach, Barry. I did give a class in which I answered that. If you email me, I'm happy to download that class. I gave a shiur to doctors on triage, two shiurim on triage, and in the second one I answered that question about imach, and I'm not going to go off track in this discussion to answer it, so please feel free to email me, and I'll be very happy to send you a fantastic set of answers to that great riddle. Okay, so Danny, ba'oznei bincha, yes. Tell them what, Danny? What do you tell ba'oznei bincha? What do you tell them? No. Ma chomer, yeah, no. Danny, okay. Ba'oznei bincha et ma. Ma omrim lahem. Come on, what do you tell your children? No. What's the subject that you tell them? Okay, obviously the subject is the Exodus, right? The Pasuk says, Asher asiti nu, Dani nu, asiti ma, asiyati et ma, how Hashem brought us out of Egypt, Jenny. Clearly. Right? Danny, Katzman, I'm not sure you're with me. Right? The point is, mitzvahs, I'm sorry to labor this point, but it is so important, it has to be clear. Mitzvahs essay shel Torah, it is a positive mitzvah of the Torah, lesaper, to tell. The Rambam doesn't say the exodus from Egypt. He says, benissim v'niflos, the miracles and wonders, shenasu l'avoseinu b'Mitzrayim, that were performed for our forefathers in Egypt, b'leil chamisha asar b'Nisan, on the night of the 15th of Nisan, shenema, as it says, zachar es hayom hazeh, remember this day that you went out of Egypt, like it says, remember the day of Shabbos. Okay, there's a side problem here which I'll leave you to think about. Why does it have to be like the Torah says, remember Shabbos? I mean, what has Shabbat got to do with going out of Egypt? I mean, why do you need that as an example? The Torah says quite clearly, tell the story of going out of Egypt. The Rambam says, well, you tell the story, remembering the story like you remember Shabbos. I mean, why do you need that here? What is Shabbat got to do? It is true that going out of Egypt in the Torah is called a Shabbat, Mimocharata Shabbat. That is true. But that is true, Eitan, that is indeed true. But that does not seem to be necessary here in the law. But I don't want to focus on that aspect of the question. I want to focus on this stupendous fact that the Rambam tells you that the mitzvah that the Torah phrases of talking about the Exodus means talking about miracles. This is amazing. We never deviate from the simple meaning of the words. Okay? If the Torah says tell the story, you tell the story. Right? The Torah says clearly, remember this day that you went out of Egypt. Surely the most important thing to remember about the day is the fact that you went out of Egypt. The Rambam doesn't mention that. The Rambam mentions miracles and wonders. The Passover does not say miracles and wonders. Okay, you have to see how radical this is. And only if you see how radical this is, will you understand what I think is the answer to this question. So let's see the flow again. It's a positive mitzvah of the Torah to talk about the miracles and wonders that occurred to our forefathers in Egypt. Not a word about the story itself. And in case you think that's an error, let's continue in the Rambam. Let's see, maybe he mentions it somewhere else. Maybe this is an introduction. And maybe he's going to tell us about telling the story a little bit later. He says like this, and how do you know it's on the 15th? Talmud Lema, because it says, tell your child on that day. When do you tell your child? At the time when you have matzah and maror in front of you, that is when you tell the story. And even if you don't have a child, this is very relevant in this sad year, when many are on their own, even if you don't have a child, or he's not present, even if you are a very wise and knowledgeable person, you're obliged to talk about this story of the Exodus, and the more you tell the story, the better it is. Normally we like to speak short. There's no merit in being wordy. The more words you use, usually the less significant they are and the cheaper they are. But in this case, the more you say, the better. The reason is because the mitzvah here is talking. Okay, the mitzvah is the talking. This is called Haggadah. Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. I don't need to remind you, I'm sure that the month of Nisan corresponds to the faculty of speech. Every one of the 12 months, Kabbalistically, corresponds to a different faculty. Adar, which is the month we just came out of. Adar is the month of laughter. The Hippoch of Purim, which occasions laughter. Each month of the year has a different aspect, different part of the body, and a different faculty. And Nisan happens to be speaking. That's why Pesach means the mouth talks. Haggadah means the telling. That's why the Zohar explains that in Egypt speech was in exile. The Jewish people could not speak. The great leader of the Jewish people, Moshe Rabbeinu, could not speak. These are not accidents. These are all intrinsic to the process. And therefore the mitzvah is telling the story. And so the more you talk about, the better. Normally, we want less words. There's a law that you should always teach your student in a brief way, not a wordy way. Here we want to talk more. That's what he says. Now, mitzvah l'dir l'bonim. Now, let's go to law number 2. So far, the Rambam still has not told us that it's a mitzvah to talk about the actual Exodus. All he's told us is that you talk about miracles. Base, number 2. Mitzvah lo'dir l'bonim. It is a mitzvah to teach the children. Lo'dir l'bonim, that means to make them know. Let them know. Va'afilu lo yishalu. And even if they did not ask. The Rambam is telling you here that the ideal educational tool is the children should ask. Okay? That's a very important educational principle, is that you can only really talk to somebody who wants to hear. When someone asks you a question, you can talk. If no one asks you, says the Rambam, unfortunately, you have an obligation to teach him anyway, so you've got to tell him. But it's much less effective than if someone asks a question. And by the way, if he asks you a question that's irrelevant, it's okay. Because once he's in a position of asking, you're in a position of answering. As soon as I put myself in a position of requesting something from you, then I'm ready to receive when you give to me. Even though what you're ready to give, even though what you give me might not be exactly what I was expecting to get. But I put myself in a situation of being ready to receive. It's very interesting. We dip twice on this night. Okay? Matbilim, we dip on this night. And one of the 4 questions that the children ask is, why do we dip twice on this night? We never answer that question in the Haggadah. We never answer it. Go through the whole story of the Haggadah. We can spend hours going through the... Excuse me. We can spend hours going through the text of the Haggadah. Nowhere is that question answered. And the reason, the meaning here is, we want the children to ask that question simply to ask a question. Right? Exactly what the question is and exactly how we respond is another story. But we want them to be in a position of asking. So ideally, dip the egg in salt water, Danny. I don't think it's a mitzvah of dipping. It's a mitzvah of eating the egg with salt water. Don't have to dip. You can pour the salt water over the egg. Okay, the point there is to eat the egg with salt water, which is reminiscent of tears. But anyway, be that as it may, the point of the dipping is to get the children to ask a question, because you can only be effective as an educator when the person is asking a question. I'll just tell you as a tool in counseling, those of you who work with people and you counsel, I will never deal with a person who does not come to ask me. Sometimes I get a call from a parent. Please, you've got to speak to my child. They're dating a non-Jew, or they're engaged to a non-Jew, or they've got this problem or that problem. Please speak to my child. I refuse. I can't speak to somebody who's not wanting to speak to me. Imagine a child is doing something the parent does not approve of. Suddenly the child gets a call from an Orthodox rabbi. I would like to speak to you. Who are you to speak to me? Right? On the contrary, that will occasion a resistance. But if I say to the parent, I'm sorry, get them to call me. Get them to call me with an irrelevant question. It doesn't matter, but get them to ask me something. Then I can answer. So this is the reason we try to get the children to ask. However, the child doesn't ask. Of course, the next best thing is do something to stimulate a question that the child will ask you. But, says the Rambam, if he doesn't, then you have to tell him anyway, Shenema, because it says Haggadah Talabincha. Haggadah Talabincha means tell your child. It means tell him under all circumstances, whether he asked you or not, even if he didn't ask you. Okay, we're simply learning through the words of the Rambam here. Now, tell your child. Now listen to this. Lefi daita shel ben aviv malandoi. According to the maturity of the mind of the child, the parent teaches him. Ketzad, what does that mean? Ima yokoten or tipesh. If the child was extremely young or intellectually undeveloped, you say to him, again, katan or tipesh, that means very young or very undeveloped. Tipesh means he doesn't have intelligence yet. You say to him, Bani, my son, my child, kulanu hayinu avodim, we were all slaves, kamo shivchazu, like this maidservant, or kamo eved zeh, or like this servant, you indicate, right, you give him a show and tell, show him a servant, but I'm not sure all of you have many servants walking around your home. If you do, you can point to one of them. No doubt some of you have numerous servants in white uniforms, right, walking around your home. You pull one of them aside and you say, my child, we were like this servant. If not, show him a picture, or cast his mind back to times in history when that was the case. Ubalayla hazeh, and on this night, Podo Isana Kodesh Baruch Hu, Hashem redeemed us, v'yitzienu lecherus, He took us from slavery to freedom. Listen carefully to this. For the first time here, the Rambam talks about telling the story. Here the Rambam says, you say to your child, we were slaves, we were servants, slaves, manservants, maidservants, and Hashem took us from servitude to freedom. For the first time here, the Rambam phrases the telling of a story of slavery to freedom. In which context? Only for a child who is very young or very intellectually undeveloped. In other words, listen to what's happening here. The Rambam is teaching you that the occasion, the context for telling the story of the Exodus, as the Torah tells you to do, is only to somebody who is so young, whose mind is so undeveloped, that all he can understand is the practical meaning of the story. We were slaves, we were freed. We were in a place called Egypt. We went out to the desert, through Sinai, received the Torah, went towards Israel. You tell him the practical geopolitical facts. Who do you tell that to? Only somebody who can understand only that. But as soon as the child is more mature, as soon as he's not called very young, as soon as he's not called intellectually undeveloped, what do you talk to him about? Miracles. This could not be more plain. The Rambam understands, right? The Rambam's not twisting or distorting or misapplying the words of the Torah. The Rambam's job is to understand and apply the Torah. The Rambam understands when the Torah tells you to talk about an exodus, it does not mean a practical exodus. It means an exodus from the natural to the miraculous. Let me say that again. Let me say this again, please. Alex, what's the point of prompting random questions? I explained. What you want to do is to generate questions. Once the child has put himself in a position of being ready to receive from you, then you can deliver. Okay? So let us understand what's being said here. The story that you need to tell your children, or your inner child, is the story of the exodus from the natural to the supernatural. The Rambam's language, I'll read it again. Positive mitzvah of the Torah to talk about the miracles and wonders that occurred to our forefathers in Egypt. Right? That's what's important. The fact that we went out of Egypt into freedom, that's not important. Where do you mention that? Only to somebody who can only understand that. Let me try to put it to you this way. I think what's being said here is our story, our national story, is an exodus. It's an exodus from the natural to the supernatural. The Jewish people live on a different plane. We live on the plane of miracles. We left the natural. Egypt is a natural place. Mitzrayim is gematria mispar, number. Numbers, the mathematical world. The world of organized, logical progression, 1 to 2 to 3. Okay, you know the word Mitzrayim means to squeeze the 50th. Meitzar, yam. Meitzar, to straighten, to squeeze, yam, yud mem, the 50. Egypt is the place where the 50th is constrained. 50 is always the miracle. 49 is the natural, 7 times 7 aspects of the natural world. 50 is always beyond the natural world, right? In Torah, the 50th is always the supernatural. How many days from Pesach to Shavuot? 49. The 50th day, Torah. Meeting Hashem personally. Leaping up into the supernatural world. Pesach, by the way, means leaping up. Pesach means leaping to the 50th level with no intervening steps. After that, you have to pay the price and you walk step by step. By the way, that's why we don't count the 50th day. You notice we count 49 days of the Omer. We don't count the 50th day. Why not? Why don't we count the 50th? The whole point, the Torah says count 50 days. We count 49. The 50th cannot be counted. The 50th is the result of counting 49. 50 is beyond number. It's not another number. Okay? The point of the exodus from Egypt is to move from the natural to the supernatural. That's where we live as Jews. Nothing could be more important in us. If you want to fulfill the mitzvah correctly, that's a good question, Eitan. The reason we count from the second night of Pesach, not the first night, indeed, is because the first night is miraculous as well. Indeed, the first and the 50th. The first is a miracle for free. The 50th is the one that you've earned. That's why the first night of Pesach, you don't have to say the psukim of protection. You can leave your door unlocked. Okay. Indeed, the first night is called Pesach, to leap over. You can have whatever you want on the first night of Pesach. It's totally free. It's miraculous. Then you've got this is called fly now, pay later. Indeed. So we don't count the first night. We don't count the 50th. But be that as it may, what we are not doing on Pesach is telling our story, telling our children a historical story. That's not what we're doing. Okay, let me make this plain. Every nation has a practical geopolitical history. Right? The South Africans, they started at the Cape. The British were oppressing them. They didn't like the British, so they left. They trekked with their wagons, and they started a new country. The Americans, they didn't like the British. I'm sorry to say it was the British again. They didn't like the British. They left, and they broke away, and they fought a war of independence, and they became America. There's a story. Every nation has that story. Speak to the Portuguese or the Brazilians, everybody has their geopolitical reality. Okay? That's not what's important to us. The fact that it happened to be a country called Egypt, and it happened to be a place called the desert, and that it happened to be a land called Israel, is not important. Don't misunderstand me. It's very important because all of those dimensions have spiritual connections. But what the children need to get, the message they need to get, is not that we became a nation because we moved through certain geographical, political realities. That's not important. That does not make us different than any other nation. That is not our pride of origin. Okay? The fact that we started in one country and we happened to be enslaved, and then we moved to another country and we happened to be freed, okay, where we could express ourselves independently with our own national character. That's not what's important. It is very important. Please don't misunderstand me. It's like a person saying the body's not important, the soul's important. The body's very important. You can't have a soul, okay, doing what it needs to be doing unless you have a body. I haven't forgotten that. But the point of the Jewish experience, where children get their Jewish identity, which is the Pesach Seder, where they learn who they are. Once and for all. Once a year. This is the educational experience. From here on, everything is built on that. Everything in Judaism is Zeicha L'Tzias Mitzrayim. For the Zeicha in memory of the going out of Egypt. Zeicha, half the mitzvahs in the Torah are Zeicha L'Tzias Mitzrayim. Believe it or not, even when we make Kiddush on Shabbos, Kiddush on Shabbat, what do we say? Zeicha L'Tzias. Kiddush on Shabbat, that celebrates the creation of the world. We don't pick up the cup of wine on Shabbat and say, Zeicha L'Maaseh Bereshit. Right? We say Zeicha L'Tzias Mitzrayim, amazingly. We recall the creation as well, of course. Of course we do. But the whole Torah is based on the going out of Egypt. Why? Because the going out of Egypt was a going beyond the natural into the supernatural. Nothing could be more important, and in a generation where children don't see that, in our generation, where we don't experience the supernatural, where we are limited by the constraints of the natural, nothing could be more important. Nothing could be more important than remembering that we had a journey, we undertook a journey that moved us not from one physical place to another, but from one material place to a supernatural place. Okay? Let's read the words again and see if it makes sense. Mitzvahs eseshel Torah. It is a positive mitzvah of the Torah, lesaper, to tell, but nisim v'niflos, the miracles and wonders, shenasu l'avosenu, that happened to our forefathers in Egypt on this night. Right? You're telling them that we lived in Egypt and we experienced miracles. We went from an Egyptian reality to a miraculous reality. The fact that we also left Egypt and became free, that you tell a child when he's 4 years old and can't understand anything else. But when he's 14 years old or 40 years old, what he needs to hear is way beyond the geopolitical reality. He needs to hear that we moved into the supernatural world. Let me put it one more way, if I may. If you don't say this at the Seder, you've not done your job. If you do a wonderful job at the Seder, talking about Egypt and slavery and freedom, right? According to the Rambam, you have not done your job. Unless you emphasize the fact, unless you sit at the Seder saying that we were blown away by the miracles, right? Unless the emphasis of the Seder is water turning to blood, and frogs going crazy, and hail with fire inside. Okay, that's not peripheral. That's not, we tend to think that the essence of the story is the Exodus. The mode of the Exodus was amazing light and sound show, which happened to be miraculous. That's wrong. The essence of the story is miracles. The peripheral sort of stage set happens to be an exodus from slavery to freedom. That's completely secondary. Okay, let me ask you please if this is clear before we continue. Eitan is asking, if the mitzvah is to tell the miracles and not the story, why don't we have the same mitzvah for Purim? Eitan, as it happens, that's exactly what we do on Purim. That's exactly what we do. The mitzvah of Purim is called Pirsum Nisa. Eitan. The mitzvah of Purim is to publicize the miracle. Pirsum Nisa. How do we do it? The point of the Purim miracle was that it was a hidden miracle. The whole point of the Purim miracle is that it was a series of political events that we realized were not natural. Let me say it to you like this. There are two redemptions that the Jewish people experience. Pesach and Purim. Pesach is redemption in the light, and Purim is redemption in the darkness. Pesach is receiving the Torah in the light when it's obvious, and Purim is learning to receive the Torah when it's not obvious at all. When you see political events, there's a king, he couldn't sleep, they read him the book, Haman happens to appear that night, there's a queen, she happens to be Jewish, she doesn't know. There's no open miracles in Purim. It's a lack of the draw, that's what Purim means. There's no manna falling from heaven, no dead people being revived. There's coincidences. The greatness of the Jewish people is that they take a Purim and they realize that it's miraculous. But Eitan, here comes the secret. You know how we know that Purim is miraculous? Because we once experienced Pesach. Stay with me. This is an amazing thing to understand. Please stay with me. The reason that we know that Purim is miraculous, even though it does not look like it's miraculous, is because we lived through a Pesach. Pesach teaches you that everything is miraculous. Then you can live through a Purim and not be fooled. The laughter of Purim is taking off the mask. Please stay with me. Nothing could be more important than this. Okay? Shalom. The 4 cups of wine is about freedom, not miracles. Well, Shalom, let me ask you why the Rambam doesn't say that. Shalom, I'm reading you the words in the Rambam. The Rambam says the mitzvah is to tell your children that we went from the natural to the miraculous. The style was Egypt to the desert, was one country to another, was freedom from slavery, so we drink the wine, we eat the matzah. That all builds the atmosphere. But when you come to talk about the story, Shalom, the Rambam says, you don't emphasize the Exodus, you emphasize the Exodus from the natural to the miraculous. Shalom, I'm not making this up, I'm only reading the words of the Rambam. And you see clearly this is what's going on. So, and nothing could be more important because you're dealing with children who don't experience a miraculous world. They're trained in a scientific, reductionist, materialist world, and you've got to take them back to a time when they feel miracles all around them. Your educational agenda, the educational project has to be so powerful at Pesach that the children go to sleep that night dreaming of walls of water and hail with fire inside and frogs miraculously being created. That's what the child has to get. The child gets a story that we left one place, happened to be called Egypt, and went through another place. That's not relevant. It could have been, Uganda. From that point of view. Okay. Barry, if the miracles are the main emphasis, why are the makkos mentioned so briefly? Barry, the makkos are not mentioned briefly. The Haggadah is about the makkos. The Haggadah is about the makkos. That's exactly what it is. Time and again, Yad Chazaka and Zreya Netuya, right? And we talk about all 10 of them, and then we give the abbreviations of the makkos, and then we say that all the makkos are subsumed in 2 of them, namely the Dever and the Cherev. Barry, what in the Haggadah is not talking about the makkos? Okay, absolutely. And Dayenu, he did this for us and that for us, one step after another, right? Giving us the manna in the day. Absolutely, the whole Haggadah is exactly doing that. Exactly, that's exactly what we're doing. Naomi, that's a separate question about whether women are obliged, and in this case they are obliged. Naomi, women are obliged, and the reason is, although it was a time-bound mitzvah, they were involved. The women were involved. Not only that, Naomi, the women were the reason. The women were the reason for the mitzvah. Okay, they were the ones who held strong in Egypt and pulled us through when the men had weakened. Okay, Barry, express each of them more deeply. The makkos, that's up to you. That's up to you. The Haggadah tells the story, but the Rambam's telling you that the essence of the story is the miracles, and the format happens to be an Exodus. I don't know why anyone's arguing with me. This is absolutely clear in the Rambam, right? You can have your own opinion. You can disagree with the Rambam. But we are learning here, right, something fundamental. Let us take Eitan's question and take it one step further. Purim. The Purim story, the story of Purim is viable only because we had the story of Pesach. You know that, where did this begin? So the Medrash says that when Lot was with his family in Sodom, Lot in Sodom, in the eye of the storm, just before the city of Sodom was wiped out, he was hosting guests. He was sitting in his home hosting guests. The next day the whole city, the whole civilization was about to be wiped out. And if you look carefully, you'll see 2 words are used there. A seudah, right? A seudah and a mishteh. He was feeding them 2 types of meal. And amazing, the Midrashim say that Lot, in the eye of the storm, in Sodom, before Sodom was about to be wiped out, and he would end up in a cave and end up fathering the 2 nations that would lead to the Messiah, the Messianic advent in the world, 2 meals were being celebrated. What were they celebrating? A Pesach Seder and a Purim Suda. How do we know that? Well, we know the Midrash tells us that when the angels went to visit Avraham, just before they came to Lot, he gave them matzah. Right? He gave them matzah. After all, it was Pesach. Of course, Pesach had not happened historically, but it was happening spiritually. Although Pesach had not yet happened historically, that would be centuries later, but that time of spring is the time when Pesach is happening in the spiritual world. And here the Mashiach is about to be born, the future of the Jewish people is about to be built, and just before it happens, there's a celebration. Just like the Jewish people, just before they leave Egypt and are born as B'ni B'cher Yisrael, you are my firstborn, on the eve of that departure, just like with the destruction raging about them, Lot and his family, with the destruction about to come hailing down around them, is celebrating 2 types of a meal, a Pesach Seder and a Purim Suda. These are the 2 bookends of our redemption. Pesach is where the Jewish people begin. The first redemption begins, essentially a movement from the natural to the supernatural, and then, at the end of history, the last prophetic event that happens in history, the Megillah of Purim. That is where a miracle occurs, but it's not obvious. Now the point is, as a Jew, to be able to see the miraculous in the natural. And that's the answer to the question that many of you asked. Since Purim, we experience a natural world, we don't experience a supernatural world. The point is, the greatness of living in the world as a Jew is to see that behind the natural is a miraculous. Your children will be able to do that if they go through a Pesach Seder where they experience a glowing story that you tell them of the miraculous. When you put their minds back into the fact that we began as a people born in a blaze of miracles, they will then be so inspired that as they go through the natural phase of life, they will see it as miraculous. There's the famous Ramban at the end of Parshas Boy. The Ramban says the miracles in Egypt were for one purpose. The purpose of the miracles in Egypt was to teach us that there's nothing called nature. Let me say it again. The Ramban says that the purpose of the miracles in Egypt was to show you that what you think is natural is not natural. It's all run by a hand behind the scenes, which is creating and causing it all to be. And the language of the Ramban is minanissim, from the open public miracles. Adam Makir, a person knows and recognizes that all of nature comes from the same place. And then he makes an extreme statement. He says, V'ein la'adam chelek b'teres Moshe, a person, a Jew, has no portion in the Torah of Moshe, ad she'na min v'neda, until you know and recognize, believe, that all the natural is just as miraculous as the miraculous. How do you know that? Because you once experienced miracles. If you lived in a world where Hashem never revealed himself, it's all mechanics. But we once experienced the curtain being pulled aside. The veil was lifted, the curtain was drawn, we saw Hashem. Not only we saw Hashem, we saw the natural world dance to a miraculous tune that showed us that there's no such thing as a natural, self-contained order. Once we saw that, we can move through the rest of history with Hashem hidden completely, but we've seen him once. Which means that everything that happens in a natural way, we don't interpret that way at all. And we live in Persia, and there's an anti-Semitic decree, and it all appears natural. Appears natural. There's a lottery, there's a decree of destruction against the Jews, there's a powerful man who wants to kill all the Jews. What could be more natural than that? It happens in every generation. He's got a king who hates us, gives him permission to do it. All the non-Jews are quite happy to rise up and kill us. They're looking forward to the day. Perfectly natural. This is what happens all the time. In every generation they try and do that to us. And there's no revealed miracles at all. No dead being revived, no Jordan River splitting, no ocean splitting, no manna from heaven. Just a natural sequence of events. Who guides us through that? A rabbi. A rabbi. But Mordechai telling you the right way to interpret things, completely contrary to the way you see them. And there we learn to see a miraculous hand. That's the point of living through history. Where did we get that? Pesach. Let's understand. What was the purpose of the miracles of leaving Egypt? Stay with me here. This is an amazing, amazing thing to understand. Something that can change you forever. What is the point of the miracles? The Ramban, Nachmanides, he says to teach you the 13 principles of faith. Miracles teach you that Hashem exists, punishes the wicked, knows human thoughts. Okay? All the 13 principles, the Ramban carefully goes through all of them to show you how the Exodus teaches all the principles, including Tchias HaMesim, which we learn from the splitting of the sea. These need explanation. But the Ramban goes through the principles, the Rambam's 13 principles, articles of faith, and shows you how some aspect of the Exodus teaches. The miracles teach that Hashem is Kol Yochel, that he can do whatever he wants. Okay? So, the purpose of the miracles is to teach you that Hashem is behind the scenes, and the natural, what you think is the natural, is not really natural. Let me put it to you like this. There's a fantastic Sfas Emes, Sfat Emet, the Sfas Emes, quoting his grandfather. He says something out of this world. It takes a little explanation. But, Jonathan, why does Purim precede Pesach? It doesn't precede it. Pesach's the beginning of the year, and Purim follows. It's the end of the year. What do you mean it precedes it? Jonathan, please. Pesach is the first month of the year. Down in the depth of winter, at the very end of the year, is Purim. If you want to say it precedes it because it happens to come before it in the calendar, it's a circle. You could say anything precedes anything else in a circle. The year goes round and round and round. On the contrary, Pesach begins it. It's a point of inspiration. Purim ends it. Purim in the depth of winter, where you learn to see the humor, that what looks like a process going in one direction actually is not like that at all. But the reason you can approach a Purim with the faith to know that it's going to turn around one day is because you've seen it once. Okay, and that's what Pesach is. So, let me tell you what the Sfas Emes says. He says that the world was created with 10 statements. Esem Ma'amoros. Hashem created the world with 10 statements. What did He create? The natural world. 10 statements of creation. Let there be light. Okay? 10 statements of creation. Let there be light. Separate the light and the darkness. 10 statements that create a natural world. Where does the process of this creation end? A long history. Jewish people formed from the great forefathers and mothers, living in Egypt, enslaved, redeemed, reached the pinnacle of Sinai when they hear another 10 statements, the 10 commandments. Hashem reveals Himself, Aseres Adibros. Very interesting. So the world begins with 10 statements that create the natural world. And the world culminates with 10 statements, which are the 10 commandments. A supernatural world, not just supernatural, making contact with the source itself. When we heard the 10 commandments, we actually met Hashem personally, at least for the first 2 of them. So let's see that progression again. 10 statements of creation, where the natural world begins. It's set up, light and darkness, the whole cosmological setup, the earth, everything growing, all the statements of creation. Set the scene for human existence. Human existence goes through all its stages, and eventually, after all the stages of human existence and human history, the culmination of history is when we stand at Sinai, and we have another 10. The 10 commandments. Now listen carefully to this. What is the point of transition from the 10 natural statements of creation to do the 10 supernatural statements of the 10 commandments? Where's the switch? Where do the 10 statements that have created a natural world flip into demonstrating a supernatural world? 10 plagues. Ooh, very interesting. 10, 10, and 10. So here's how it works. The 10 statements of creation, a natural world is set up. You then go through a transition. You're living in Egypt under very constrained circumstances, where the natural world is totally controlling. Okay, you're beaten down by it, enslaved by it. No possibility to express anything spiritual. And suddenly there's a switch. 10 plagues. Each of them knocking out one level of the natural order. Why were there 10 plagues, by the way? Could Hashem not have wiped out the Egyptians in one move? And by the way, couldn't He have knocked out the Egyptians with one natural move? He could have had a disastrous Egyptian stock market collapse, a cholera epidemic, COVID epidemic. There are lots of things He could have done. It had to be miraculous, water becoming blood, hail falling with fire inside. Okay? Darkness that you could feel. The point is, the 10 plagues in Egypt are teaching you how to take the natural 10 levels of the world and flip them into seeing that here is what happened. The exodus from Egypt. The 10 plagues in Egypt were an ultimate, one-time in history, educational experience, teaching you the articles of faith, teaching you who runs the world, and the one who runs the world is completely transcendent. The point of leaving Egypt is to move from the natural to the miraculous. That the 10 statements that form the organized, decimal-based world of science and mathematics and chemistry and physics goes through a transition. The transition where all of those things suddenly move into a higher mode, into the miraculous mode. And suddenly you experience that everything you thought was natural is miraculous. And that moves you to Sinai, where you meet Hashem personally. Not only where you realize that the natural is supernatural, where you actually, and that there's someone behind it. Here you actually meet the one who's behind it. Let me try to build this a bit more clearly. Okay, let me try to build this a bit more clearly. You know, the Rambam puts it like this, in the 8th chapter of the Foundations of Torah. I would like to share with you, and maybe we'll finish with this. I'd like to share with you something that is so misunderstood. When I say misunderstood, not wrongly understood, but very superficially understood. Let me do my best to express this. Something taught by Rav Moshe Shapiro in a classic fashion. The Rambam says that anyone who believes in God because of miracles has an imperfection in his heart. Okay, here's the language. Kol ha'ma'amin al pi ha'osos. Anybody who believes because of miracles, yesh beliboy dofi, has in his heart an imperfection, dofi. Dofi means an adulteration, imperfection, a slight off-taste, something adulterating purity. Meaning that anybody who believes in Hashem because of miracles has an inadequacy in his belief. And he explains, Ki yachol sheyeh because it's possible for a miracle to be done al yedei lat v'kishuf. A miracle could be done by incantations or magic, some sort of sorcery, right, Egyptian type of manipulation of the natural world. And therefore, says the Rambam, if you believe in God because you've seen miracles, you have an imperfection in your belief. But when you stand at Sinai and you meet Hashem personally, Einenu, our eyes that saw and our ears that heard, then there's no imperfection in your belief at all. Then you have a direct experience and a direct knowledge. These are not things that could have been done by miracles and sorcery. After all, you're meeting Hashem personally, face to face, so intimately that the Jewish people died. Then the shamans flew out to Hashem and bonded with him. They had to be revived. They bonded. They've died again. That was where Hashem kissed us with the kisses of his mouth. And at that point, there's no doubt left. Let me tell you the misunderstood, superficial way of learning this Rambam. Please, stay with me, please, here. Michael, maybe your question will be answered with this. So here's what it looks like. It looks like miracles are not adequate. Not good enough. Miracle could be done by sorcery. Somebody's very clever magician could do it. And therefore, there's always a doubt in your mind. It's 90%, 95% belief in Hashem, but there's always 5% doubt because maybe this is done by some sort of manipulation. Only when you meet Hashem personally at Sinai do you have 100% proof. That's how people learn this Rambam. And there's a certain truth to it. There's a certain truth to it. The Ran echoes that idea. But there's something much, much deeper going on. And this is what I'd like to leave you with, if you can stay with me carefully, please. It's not easy to express, but it's something exquisite. The miracles in Egypt, it's a very serious mistake to think that they were inadequate in terms of teaching belief. They were not inadequate. They were fine. Let me give you a couple of proofs. Hashem says to Moshe, I'm going to perform plagues in Egypt, miracles in Egypt, Laman Tedu, the order that you know, She'en Kamoni B'chol Haaretz, that there's no one like me, that Pharaoh and his people shall know. 5 times Hashem says to Moshe, I'm going to bring about miracles in order that there'll be no doubt about who I am. Well, if Hashem says that the miracles will leave no doubt, then of course they leave no doubt. What does the Rambam mean that in your heart is a little doubt because they could have been done through sorcery? Secondly, you see that the plague certainly achieved their goal. No one had any doubts. No one had any doubts. Do you think that when the Jewish people left Egypt, they had a 5% doubt in their minds, maybe this is not God? Of course not. Third proof. The plagues were meant to teach the Egyptians about God's existence. The Egyptians got the message, loud and clear. They were not trying. The Egyptians were trying very hard not to get the message. The first few plagues they tried desperately to show that that doesn't prove that it's God. We can do the same thing. But eventually they were forced to admit it. Etzba Elokim, he. Eventually the Egyptians were forced to agree that this is God. So the Egyptians got the message. So 1 second. The Rambam's telling you that miracles are not good enough because a miracle could always be done by sorcery and it leaves you in doubt. But you see that's not true. You see that the Jewish people got the message loud and clear. They had no doubts. Not only that, you see that the Egyptians, who were desperately trying to avoid the message, got the message loud and clear. You see that God announced in advance that the plagues will get the message across. And they did, and God's not wrong. So what does the Rambam mean that there's some doubt in your heart? Please, can you see the problem? Let me give you the flip side of the problem. If you mean to tell me that when you go to Sinai, that's a clinching experience that you could never doubt, and not only that, the Jewish people will never doubt it subsequently, that's just wrong. That's wrong. You could stand at Sinai, and the next morning you could wake up and say that you were hypnotized. Moshe Rabbeinu was a good hypnotist. Or, it was the magic mushrooms they were eating that gave them hallucinations. Why not? Why is that? Why is going through the extra voltage of the Sinai experience more of a clinching experience that there's no room to doubt? There's always room to doubt, as long as you're human. You can never know anything perfectly. Rav Tzadok HaKohen says that if Aristotle would have stood at Sinai, the very next day, he would have brought Moshe Rabbeinu 100 proofs that it never could have happened the day before. It's just impossible. So let me phrase the problem again, please. I hope you can see this. It's beautiful to understand this. Here's the question. The miracles in Egypt, the Rambam says, were not good enough because if you believe through miracles, you've always got a doubt. Sinai clinched the doubt. That doesn't make any sense. The miracles in Egypt left no doubt. The Jewish people got the message 100%. The Egyptians got the message 100%. What doubt is he talking about? And secondly, standing at Sinai closes all doubts. That's just wrong. And furthermore, listen to this. If the miracles in Egypt leave you with doubt, and the point of the miracles in Egypt is to get the Egyptians to know, and you cannot know from miracles, then it's very unfair that they didn't stand at Sinai. Let me say that question again. If the plagues in Egypt leave you with a doubt, and God doesn't want anyone to have doubts, He doesn't want the Egyptians to have doubts, like He says 5 times, I want them to know. If miracles leave you with a doubt, then it's very unfair not to make them stand at Sinai, to close their doubts. But He didn't do that. So if you need to stand at Sinai, listen carefully, if you need to stand at Sinai to have certainty, how come the Egyptians didn't? And if Sinai does give you certainty, why did we need the plagues if they're inadequate? I hope you see the questions. Just give me a quick yes, please, on my screen if you understand the questions. Good. Listen to the answer, because this is something exquisite and out of this world. If you understand correctly what I'm about to say, you'll never be the same again. The miracles in Egypt were perfectly adequate to prove God's existence, 100%. But the problem is, they're a proof by derivation, by inference, by deduction. You get to know that God exists because water becomes blood and because you manipulation of the natural. When you see miracles, you conclude that God exists, 100%, but indirectly. You haven't seen Him. You haven't made contact with Him. These are things that can be done by sorcery as well. That means these are things that could be done by manipulation. There are functions, there are some kind of a function and a distortion within the natural world. But the natural world doesn't behave that way. So you infer and you realize and you deduce that this must be God. So you come to 100% clarity that God exists, but you haven't met Him. The reason we went to Sinai was not to get a better knowledge, not to clinch any doubts. The reason we went to Sinai was to get married to Him. And that's not for Egyptians. Let me say it again. This is fundamental. Danny Katzman, stay with me, you're going to enjoy this. The miracles in Egypt are 100% clear. We got the message 100%. Egyptians got the message 100%. How do we get the message? By logical inference. When we go to Sinai, we get the message not by logical experience, by intimate experience. Yishakenu min neshikos piu. He shall kiss us with the kisses of His mouth. That's not for non-Jews. That's for us. Listen to Rav Moshe Shapira. We did not go to Sinai for a better quality of proof. זה לא עניין של עוצמת ההוכחה, זה עניין של איכות הידיעה. Isn't that beautiful? Danny Katzman, did you appreciate that? No? Let me say it again, please, one more time. זה לא עניין של עוצמת ההוכחה, זה עניין של איכות הידיעה. We did not go to Sinai for a more powerful proof. There was no more powerful proof. We had 100% powerful proof. 99, whatever it gets, as good as it gets for human beings. We didn't go to Sinai. We went to Sinai for something that cannot be done through sorcery. It's got nothing to do with manipulation of the natural. We went to Sinai for a different type of knowledge. And that knowledge was intimate and personal. And when you've been through that, your children will be ready to give their lives for it 500 years later, and 1,000 years later, and 1,500 years later, and 2,000 years later. Why? Because we become different type of people. We've been lifted from the natural to the miraculous. We learned how to do that in Egypt. We began as a natural people and ended up in the slavery of the natural world. Okay? And then we had an educational experience. The natural isn't what it seems. Miracles overturned the natural order. A detailed educational program in seeing that the natural is not natural, that there's someone behind it, and understanding that deeply. That's the message. And we got the message, all 13 principles of faith, 10 levels of the natural world, right? Given an ability to transcend and teach that they're not natural at all. And once you get the message, you're ready to meet the one who's behind the scenes. Now you're ready to get married to Him. First you learn. And what's the result? When you leave Sinai, you travel through history, and you walk through Midbar Ha'amim, the desert of the nations, and 3,300 years later, you have not seen him for a long time. No miracles for 2,000 years, no prophecy for 2,000 years. You've taken with you the message that the natural ain't natural. You met him once, okay? Leida, lahamin v'leida, Dani, exactly. You have been through a stage where you can believe and know. Believe and know. First you believe through inference and evidence, and then you know through a marital experience where he kisses us with the kisses of his mouth. And therefore, what we are celebrating on the Pesach Seder, we're celebrating a transition from the natural to the miraculous. Right? You have to see that COVID will fade into an aspect of the natural world once you realize this. Once you realize that he knows what he's doing. He's beating you down into a natural world for you to leap out of. Once you see that, once you behave like a Jew, okay, and you learn to live in a natural world and not be fooled by it at all. Not be fooled at all. Of course, you've got to make all the practicalities. You've got to be locked in isolation, and you've got to do the research, and you've got to do all that stuff. But if you think COVID is a natural thing, just another accident of viral adaptation in the world, you're badly mistaken. That's not the point. This is a challenge to think about it on your own. You've been sent to your room. That's what they say, right? Like a child. Go to your room and think about what you've done. You realize what you've done, you can come out again. Hashem is saying to us, go to your room and think about reality. Stay home, okay? I want you in a little bit of isolation to go, Rashi says, into the room of your heart. The Gemara in Bava Kama says, when there's a plague, right? Kanes raglecha, draw in your feet and go into your room. Al chadarecha. Rashi says, what is your room? Your room, inner room, means shuls and yeshivas under some circumstances, and when that's not applicable, the inner room of your heart. Go into your room and think about it. What are you supposed to think about? What is Pesach here to teach you? There ain't no natural. The natural world, says the Ramban, you have no share in the Torah of Moshe if you think there's a natural world. The natural world comes from the same place as the supernatural world. And therefore the process of the miracles in Egypt is an educational experience. It's taking each of the 10 statements of nature and showing you they come from the same place as the supernatural. The point of the Exodus is to teach you how to go from Pesach to Purim. Once you've got that, you're a Jew. Once you've got that message, you're ready to be kissed with the kisses of his mouth. I wish you a wonderful Pesach, an ability to see in the natural a supernatural, an ability to leap over Pesach, to leap to the 50th level, transcending the natural completely, making contact with the supernatural. Mitzvahs eseh shel Torah. It is a mitzvah of the Torah, lesaper, to talk about and tell your children nisim v'niflos, the miracles and wonders that occurred to our forefathers on this night. Good job, a wonderful Pesach.